All right, what's up guys? My name is Evan Holmes and today we're gonna be going over how to train your delts to grow some bolder shoulders and the best exercises to do for each part of the delt. Growing big delts is one of the easiest ways to improve your aesthetics and look muscular in clothing. And that's the only way you're ever gonna get any girls. Just kidding, only dudes are gonna notice, but either way. All right, so first up we're gonna talk about side delts. Now these side delts are the ones that are gonna probably give you that capped shoulder look the most and add width from the front. They're also the part of the delt that doesn't really get a lot of work from compound movements the way that the front and rear delts do. So they're probably gonna need the most like direct isolation work. So the first exercise we're gonna talk about for these side delts is gonna be a cable lateral raise with the cable set to about the height of your thigh. Probably right around there is good. And it's either gonna be done across the body like this, or done in what's called the scapular plane, which is where the arm comes slightly behind the body, like this. And the scapular plane is kind of just in between, directly out in front of you and directly out to your side, so somewhere in the middle. That's called the scapular plane because that's generally where you can raise your arm and you're gonna have the most comfortable movement in the scapula, which is the shoulder blade. If I'm doing this one, where my arm is coming across the body, I'm gonna be working these side delts and these slightly more posterior or rear fibers of the side delt. Whereas with this variation, a little spinny poo, with this variation, I'm gonna be working slightly more of the frontal fibers of the side delt and a little bit of the front delt. So if you can think, this one is like frontal side delt and some front delt, and then this one, do another little spinny poo, this one is gonna be more of the posterior or rear fibers of the side delt and some of the rear delt. I wouldn't say one of them is more important than the other. I would just say at some point do both. Like sometimes I'll have both in my split at the same time on different days though. I probably wouldn't do them on the same day just because they'd be slightly redundant due to the overlap, but absolutely you could do them at the same time in your split. So the reason that we have the cable set to this height is not because we're trying to maximize the stretch. There's no data to suggest that the delts grow better from the stretch. The reason we have the cable set to here is because the delt is gonna be strongest when it's down in this position, and that's also where the trap is doing the least amount of stabilizing, and the delt is gonna be the weakest up here, which is also where the trap's gonna be doing the most amount of stabilizing. So when we set the cable to this height, it actually makes the resistance the hardest in this position, which is also where the delt's the strongest, and it makes it the lightest in this position, and that's where the delt's the weakest. So that's gonna make sure that the exercise resistance curve matches the strength curve of the muscle that we're working. That being said, the traps can't actually take over the movement as a lot of people may say, because the traps can't lift the arm for the delt, only the delt can do that. Some people just find that their traps kind of fail before their delts do, and so this setup can kind of address that because it's gonna make it easier in the range of motion where the traps are theoretically doing the most amount of work or the most stabilizing. So it is totally fine to have the cable set up at the bottom as well. The only difference that's gonna make is just that the resistance profile is the highest when your arm is about out here rather than down here at the bottom. So you can absolutely do these with a D handle. I just prefer the cuff because it takes my wrist out of the equation. Sometimes if I'm going super hard and I'm on my last set before failure and then my wrist kind of gets all weird and twisted and shit, and then you're loading the wrist extensors kind of unnecessarily, and then I'll kind of like cock my wrist in a weird way and it hurts and it ends the set early. So D handle is totally fine. It's just like, technically I would say it's more optimal. I hate using that word, but to use cuffs, just make sure if you're using a cuff, you are clenching your fist or you're holding something in your hand. You guys will often see me holding like a D handle in my hand and using a cuff, just because that is going to create more stability through the wrist, up through the elbow and up through the shoulder. So you can also do both of the movements that we just discussed bilaterally if you have access to a dual cable stack or a cable station like this. That would be the scapular plane variation. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do this. Oh, there we go. And then this would be the crossbody variation. So that's just if you want to cut down on time. So from a cue perspective, you kind of just want to make sure that if you're doing a single arm, you have your other arm bracing, and that when you're thinking of initiating the concentric portion of the movement, you're lifting outward rather than thinking upward, because obviously your arm's attached to the shoulder, so if you think outward, eventually that turns into upward. I know, it's crazy. So just think outward rather than upward, and that will also tend to kind of down-regulate your trap recruitment a little bit as well. Whereas if I'm just thinking upward, my first reaction is to lift my whole shoulder girdle up, and that's gonna use my trap. Again, that's fine, your trap's not gonna replace your delt in terms of stimulus, but just for people who struggle with that trap engagement. And then the only other thing that I would mention is just that you don't necessarily need to have a super proud chest, but just make sure you're not super hunched over and your shoulder's not rolled forward or your trap's all shrugged up. It'll just put the delt in a little bit of a stronger position. All right, so the second exercise for side delts is gonna be either a seated or standing machine lateral raise. Now, the machine I like because of the fact that it's essentially a fixed plane of motion and it's very stable. So it reduces coordination demands and you can kind of just not think too much and just lift. Now that extra stability or fixed path of motion is a double-edged sword because for some people, if you have cranky shoulders, that fixed path of motion can kind of be a little bit uncomfortable. But if it's uncomfortable to lift straight out to the side, you can actually try turning a little bit toward the arm that you're using so that you're lifting a little bit more on the scapular plane, which tends to be a little bit more comfortable for people. So similar to the cable lateral raise that we just did with the cable set to around the thigh height, a machine lateral raise, as long as it's a pin loaded one like this one, will also load that bottom of the range of motion, which is another reason that I like machine lateral raises. If it's a plate loaded machine lateral raise where the plate is like on the handle, then again, that's gonna be similar to a dumbbell raise in the sense that it'll be heaviest up toward the top and it's not gonna load the bottom position very much. A cue that I would give you with any lateral raise, including the cable lateral raises that we just touched on, is to think of leading with your elbow rather than your hand. Because sometimes you'll see people lead with their hand and it kind of looks like this, where they're like, they almost turn it into a front raise, they externally rotate the arm and they drive their hand upward. We don't want that. What we want is to think of leading with the elbow, and you actually wanna internally rotate the arm just a little bit if it's comfortable to do so. And then think of leading with the elbow because of the fact that the delt only attaches to the upper arm, it doesn't attach to the hand. So the way that you train the delt is by moving the upper arm, and that's what you want to focus on. So anybody who's watched my previous videos will know that I'm also a fan of the seated machine lateral raise, and that's because it essentially has the same benefits as the standing. It's still gonna load that bottom position, but it's even more stable. Now we are talking about a fucking lateral raise, so that additional stability is probably not gonna make that much of a difference. Theoretically, it would result in better motor unit recruitment, but I just like the seated version because same cues as the standing machine lateral raise and the cable lateral raise. You wanna think of lifting outward rather than upward to start the movement, and you wanna think of leading with your elbow. But because it's so stable, you can kind of just turn your brain off and just lift as hard as you can. All right, so the third movement for these side delts is gonna be the line cable Y raise / lateral raise. Now this probably comes as no surprise to any of you who have watched my former videos because I love, especially the Y raise, and I do it all the time because it's so adjustable, shoulder friendly, stable, great for hypertrophy, and great for shoulder mobility and stability and general function. So a Y raise is where we're starting with our arms out in front like this, and we're making a Y with our arms. So it's essentially kind of the top half of the range of motion for the side delts. And then the lateral raise is gonna be very similar, except our arms come down further, and instead of raising kind of and making as much of a Y, we're raising a little bit more out to the side like a conventional lateral raise motion. So because with the Y raise, we're actually gonna be pulling backward a little bit as we kind of get closer to that top of the range of motion. It's gonna target a little bit more of the posterior side delt fibers, and we're actually gonna get some rear delt from it as well. And then because of the fact that we're going all the way overhead and loading the arm in that position, we're also gonna be hitting a good amount of lower trap, which is often neglected and very important for shoulder stability, mobility, function, and just overall shoulder health. I don't like to use that term because it's a little bit vague, but you get the idea. And the lower trap is just often not loaded in that position. And if you watch my videos, you'll often see me do it before I do any type of pressing because of the fact that it makes my shoulders, it's kind of a prep exercise as well, because my shoulders feel so much better when I go into a heavy press afterward. So the lateral raise variation is not gonna pose the same shoulder health or function benefits because we're not getting into that overhead position, and there wouldn't be any loading in that overhead position either. It's just gonna train these side delts in a little bit more of a lengthened position, and so it's gonna target slightly different fibers of the side delts, but also a fantastic movement from a hypertrophy standpoint because it's very stable, and just like the Y raise, using cables, it's very adjustable, it's very shoulder friendly. So as far as cues go with this exercise, very similar to the former movements. Think of leading with the elbows and think of raising outward rather than upward, and that's for both the Y raise and the lateral raise. And then a big thing with the Y raise especially is to think about keeping your chest up and keeping your shoulder blades from shrugging up. We wanna almost think about keeping our shoulder blades down, not pinned backward, but pinned downward. And that's just because it's gonna further engage the lower trap, which is, like I said before, one of the main benefits of this exercise. As always, no flailing. You don't wanna be chucking this weight around. We wanna make sure we're obviously using a lot of intensity, but just make sure the movement stays controlled and we're not throwing it out of the bottom and we're lowering it slowly. And that applies for the lateral raise as well. For the lateral raise, it's a little bit less important to think of keeping your shoulders down because we're not trying to focus on the lower trap as much. But as with most lateral raises, you don't want your shoulders to be shrugging up too much. So just as far as cable setup, kind of similar to the way that we did the cable lateral raises as the first exercise, we want to make sure that in the bottom of the movement, we've got reasonably close to a 90-degree angle between the cable and the arm. And that's just going to make sure that the largest or the highest amount of resistance during the range of motion is in the bottom when, like with cable lateral raise, the delt is the strongest and the trap's doing the least amount of stability work. And as far as kind of where to set these cables up, because it can kind of be a little bit confusing, especially with a machine like this, you just kind of want to think about it as being 1 to 2 feet out from your body, and then 1 to 2 feet up from the height of your body when it's laying on the bench. You want it to be higher up, like I said, for the Y raise, and it can be a little bit closer to the height of your body for the lateral raise. All right, all done with side delts. Now we're gonna move on to the front or anterior delt. Now the anterior delt's gonna be loaded anytime we're essentially loading, bringing the arm forward or upward. So a lot of people will not even need to do any direct isolation work for the anterior delt because it's gonna get a decent amount of work with all pressing movements. If you are one of those people who wants to do some isolation work for your front delts, maybe your front delts are lacking, and a seated machine overhead press is gonna be your go-to movement. And this is because it's maximally stable. My lower and upper body is stabilized, so I'm not gonna have to worry about stabilizing or coordinating any of that like you would with something like a standing barbell overhead press, for example. It's also gonna be easier if you have poor mobility because if I can't get all the way overhead comfortably, then I can just scoot my butt forward a little bit, and that's gonna make the movement not quite as overhead, which means my mobility won't be tested as much. That's why you see when some people do overhead standing barbell press and they've got their back all arched and they're almost so folded over at the back that it's like a flat press. We're not gonna have to deal with that while doing a seated variation. If your arm is out to the side with an overhead press, it's gonna be front delt and side delt, and it's gonna be more side delt as you get deeper. So as you get deeper with your arm out to the side delt gains leverage, which means that this kind of overhead press is also going to be a good side delt movement as well. On the other hand, if your arms are out in front, because you can do an overhead press with your arm out in front as well, it's gonna be front delt and upper chest. As you come down here, the upper chest gains more leverage. So it's gonna be mostly upper chest until you get to about there, and then it kind of hands the leverage off to the front delt, and it's gonna be purely front delt from there upward. So as a general kind of rule, if you're doing overhead press on a machine like this that has 2 handles, if you use these handles out here, it's gonna be front and side delt, and if you use these handles in here, and it brings your arms in a little bit closer, that's gonna be front delt and upper chest. You can also just cut the range of motion, which you'll see some people do on their overhead press, to only go this deep, and that'll kind of keep the tension on the front delt regardless of whether or not your arm path is out here or out here to the side. Another kind of basic tip I would probably give you guys is if you're kind of uncomfortable doing an overhead press with your arms out here, you might be more comfortable bringing your arms in a little bit, not all the way, but out here in the scapular plane. A lot of people will experience less shoulder discomfort when they're pressing overhead in the scapular plane. Now, if your gym does not have a good overhead press machine, like there's a couple other ones in this gym that don't match my leverages very well, they kind of feel shitty, deep inclined Smith machine press is also a good substitute. I would probably sub the Smith machine in before I went to something like a dumbbell press just because it's more stable, so I don't have to worry about kind of coordinating my arms like I would with dumbbells. But because it's more restricted and it's a fixed plane of motion, if you have cranky shoulders, that might bug them, in which case dumbbells would probably be a better bet for you. So as far as cues with an overhead press, I would actually say, depending on the angle of the overhead press machine you're using or whatever equipment you're using, Smith machine, dumbbell, scoot your butt forward a little bit. You don't actually need to press completely overhead to maximally target the front delts, side delts, or whatever you happen to be trying to bias there. And you're probably gonna be a little bit stronger if you're not quite as overhead. So I would scoot your butt forward a little bit, bring your chest up, think sternum up, and then make sure, as with all of your press movements, to start the movement, you're pulling your shoulder blades down, not back, so don't pinch them together, but just pull them down, and then allow your shoulder blades to move up as you press upward. An overhead press is really the only exercise that I think is worth doing in most cases. Obviously, context is king, so there will be some caveats, but the overhead press is really the only exercise that I think is worth doing for front delt kind of isolation work. The other one a lot of people do is a front raise, but like I said before, when you're raising your arm in this arm path, the upper chest is actually the primary mover from like here to here before it kind of takes over, before the front delt kind of takes over. And so I would just prefer to do an overhead press rather than a front raise.
What are you drinking, bud?
Oh, me? I'm just drinking some Transparent Labs creatine HMB paired with some non-stim pump. You should get yourself some. You can actually use code Evan for a discount, and they're actually some of the highest quality stuffs on the market. Nobody beats them in terms of quality control, sourcing, and standardization of dosages. So super funny you asked that though. Yeah, Transparent Labs, good stuff. Code Evan.
So is that crucial for big delts?
This is actually the only reason your delts will ever get big if you do these exercises. Like, it's a minor detail, but nothing will work unless you're drinking Transparent Labs. I don't make the rules. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you guys. Science. All right, so rear delts. The rear delts are gonna be worked, like I said before, anytime the arm is pulling backward. So in a lot of back movements, specifically rowing movements, you're gonna get a lot of rear delt. But in all of those movements, the peak resistance is gonna be at the end, so the shortened position for the rear delt. So I, for my isolation work for rear delts, like to try and pick movements that train the lengthened position, just so we have a little bit of variation in terms of stimulus, which should theoretically provide a little bit more regional hypertrophy. So this means that we're gonna try to pick movements that resist the rear delt from pulling outward or out here, rather than back here where we're pulling backward. We're not gonna reinvent the wheel here. The first exercise that we have up is gonna be the reverse pec deck, which obviously I'm at the beginning of the range of motion, I'm resisting my arm coming outward rather than backward. At the end of the range of motion, we're gonna be resisting the arm coming backward, which is, if you think about my arm being bent, the same thing as like a row. So this machine is gonna kind of get both of those, but as I said, it's also going to get the lengthened position, which is what we're looking for here. We're not looking for lengthened position because the rear delts benefit from stretch. There's no data to suggest that that's the case yet, or at all. We're doing this, like I said, just because all the other times the rear delt's gonna be trained, it's gonna be in the short position, so just for some variation. So I like the reverse pec deck because it's super easy to set up. You just sit down and then set the arms all the way back. And a lot of gyms have a machine pec deck or rear delt machine fly like this, so it's a pretty common exercise. And what we're gonna do here is just think about, you don't necessarily need to focus too much on reaching too far forward, but you also don't wanna be doing the movement with your shoulder blades jacked all the way back here. Just because if your shoulder blades are pulled all the way back, it's gonna affect it's called scapular humeral rhythm, but it's basically just gonna kind of affect how smoothly or how well your arm can move backward in conjunction with the scapula or the shoulder blade. So somewhere in between pulling your shoulder blades all the way back and pushing them all the way forward, you wanna just find a strong position. And then you wanna think about pulling your arms outward. So similar to the lateral raise where I said, initiate the movement by thinking of raising up or outward rather than upward. We want to initiate this movement by thinking of pulling outward rather than backward. The other thing is that the rear delt, especially with straight arms, is fully shortened like right about there. So you don't need to go all the way fucking back like that. You're not getting any additional benefit from doing some contortionist stuff. So the other thing we can do here, the other variation, is the cross body version of this while you're sitting sideways on the seat. You might have seen this going around social media. Now again, this is not because we're trying to emphasize the stretch, because stretch is better for growth. We're just trying to emphasize the stretch because the rear delt's probably not trained in this position with any other exercise ever at all. So just for the sake of variation, some additional regional hypertrophy, because certain fibers are more active in certain ranges of motion than others, you could mix this in as well. The idea here is just to set up sideways in the seat and then push yourself into the pad with your kind of working leg to add some additional stability, and use this free arm to either oppose the direction of the resistance by pushing into here or just kind of pulling into it, just something to create a little bit more stability through your body. And then bring the arm across the body like this. So another little thing you can do here, especially if you're feeling kind of like a little bit of discomfort in your shoulders, or you just aren't really connecting very well with your rear delts, or you kind of feel like you're running out of room, is just to actually not sit on here and lean forward. And this is just gonna change essentially the angle at which you are performing the movement. So instead of being like this and just kind of coming right out to the side staying at shoulder height, it's gonna be the same as if you kind of are coming down on a slight angle. And some people actually prefer that, and it allows them to connect with their rear delts a little bit more. And so it just kind of looks like this. All right, so if you're one of those people who kind of finds that with the reverse pec deck, it just doesn't really feel good on your shoulders and you can't really connect well with your rear delts, then I would try doing a bilateral or unilateral cable rear delt fly where your arms kind of come down a little bit on an angle. So I'm doing it this direction so that we have room for the camera. That's why my arms are hitting this. I would usually do it facing the other way, but essentially what this is doing is just, it's not asking your arms to be in such an elevated position. So it's just creating a little bit more room in the shoulder joint. And usually this allows people to kind of connect with their rear delts a little bit better. It is worth saying though that when you're doing this kind of thing or this kind of thing, the rear delts are really the only muscle that has a lot of good leverage to pull the arm back or to bring it outward. So even if you're not feeling your rear delt doing the movement, it's definitely working. However, that can be annoying and it can kind of mess with you a little bit mentally while you're doing your set. So completely understandable if it's a little uncomfortable to do a rear delt fly at keeping your arm kind of at shoulder height the whole time, like on the reverse pec deck, then this might be a better option for you. The thing is, same thing with the reverse pec deck, we want to make sure we're kind of biasing the length and position here. And in order to do that, we just want to make sure that the cable makes a 90-degree angle with our arm at the top of the movement. because that's gonna mean that the resistance is highest from here to here, and that's gonna drop off as we get the arm a little bit closer to behind us, which is what we're looking for because that's the opposite resistance profile of like rows that we would do for back. So we're trying to complement that with this exercise for the rear delts. All right, so as far as cues with this exercise, just some basic stuff here. You don't want your chest to be too proud, but again, you don't want it to be kind of hunched over. So sternum upward. Set your shoulder blades not back, but set them down a little bit. But then don't try and keep them there. You can let them move for sure. And then you're just thinking of kind of keeping your shoulders from coming backward too far. Because like I said before, the rear delt attaches to the shoulder blade. So if the shoulder blade's moving, then the rear delt isn't shortening as much as it otherwise would be. And you're just thinking of bringing your arms apart from each other and slightly downward. Which if you set the cable up to just, you know, about your head height or a little bit higher, that's gonna kind of happen regardless because that's gonna be the way that you're directly or opposing the resistance in the most direct way. And then for single arm, you just kind of wanna make sure that you've got your other hand bracing against something just so that you don't have to worry about opposing the resistance with like the strength from your core. And that's just gonna make sure that we are not limiting the movement with anything other than the rear delt. If you're trying to train your core from a hypertrophy standpoint, do something else specific to your core. Same cues apply here. Make sure that my chest isn't kind of dropped too far or hiked way too far up. And make sure that my shoulders are kind of set in a strong position, but I'm not too worried about keeping them in one position. You gotta let your scap move a little bit as your arm does. The other thing is too, if you wanted to emphasize the stretch a little bit more with the cable, you would just twist your body so your arm comes a little bit further across the body. Same cues apply, use your free hand to brace. And then that way, the resistance is gonna be the highest here rather than here. So just a couple things to consider if you're gonna do the unilateral cable variation. All right guys, so those are the best exercises for the front, side, and rear delts. And if you do those movements, and you train hard, and you eat your protein, and you eat your Wheaties, and you go to bed on time, you will have massive delts. Just be patient. And also, you know, no money back guarantee. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video or benefited from it, don't be afraid to comment any feedback, like the video, sub the channel, all the above. And if you like me, you can feel free to use my code at either YoungLA or transparent-labs.com and get a discount and support me. So I'll see you guys in the next video.